A glamorous night filled with sparkling chandeliers, extravagant gowns, and the faces of the city's elite. The atmosphere is one of wealth, influence, and prestige, setting the perfect stage for a VIP event. The room is filled with the most powerful individuals in the industry, all gathered for an exclusive gathering that promises to be the corporate event of the year. But what happens when a moment of carelessness, an oversight fueled by unconscious bias, disrupts this seemingly perfect evening? Imagine yourself in the shoes of Olivia Carter, a powerful woman, a thought leader in her field, invited as the keynote speaker at this high-profile event. You step out of the sleek black town car with confidence, your emerald dress hugging your curves in a way that seems tailor-made for this very moment. You're the reason half the room has gathered, yet as you approach the grand entrance of the Hilton Sapphire Ballroom, a security guard, whose job it is to ensure only VIPs are allowed entry, blocks your path. The guard's initial gaze scans the crowd of guests, but the moment it falls on you, something shifts. His eyes linger. It's that familiar look, the one you've seen too many times before. The unspoken question, who does she think she is? And just like that, without even a flicker of recognition, he steps forward to stop you. This area is for VIPs only, he states firmly, his voice neutral, yet carrying an air of authority. You don't flinch. You tilt your head slightly, offering a polite smile. I know, you reply smoothly. That's why I'm here. But the guard doesn't seem convinced. His eyes quickly scan you again, almost as if he's waiting for some kind of proof. A golden ticket, perhaps, to validate your worthiness. But Olivia Carter is far more than just a name on a list. She is the keynote speaker, the reason for this gathering, and yet in this moment all of that seems irrelevant to the guard. His skepticism is palpable. Do you have an invitation? He asks, his tone shifting slightly, becoming more insistent. You sigh inwardly, but remain composed. You know how this scene plays out. Too many times have you been judged solely on the way you look. Yet this time it's different. The guard doesn't realize that the woman he's just blocked is the very reason half the room is present. As the tension rises, you can feel the weight of the judgment in the air. And at this very moment, you realize how often people like you are put in situations where your worth is questioned based on your appearance. But this situation isn't just about a mistaken identity. It's about something far deeper. It's a commentary on the biases that shape the way we perceive others, and the consequences that arise when those biases go unchecked. Olivia Carter isn't just another attendee at this prestigious event. She's a trailblazer in her industry, an expert whose insights and contributions have shaped the very landscape of her field. But as she stands there, facing a security guard who doesn't recognize her name, it's a stark reminder of how often people are judged based on their appearance or background, rather than their achievements, character, or value. The security guard's initial failure to recognize Olivia doesn't stem from a place of malice. It's not a deliberate act of discrimination, but rather an unconscious bias, one that sees her as just another woman based on preconceived stereotypes. The incident serves as a microcosm of the larger issues at play in society, where appearances often dictate how we are treated, and where people's worth is sometimes measured not by their abilities, but by their external traits. But this story is about more than just a moment of misunderstanding. It's about how these moments, those everyday encounters where we fail to see each other fully, are shaping our social landscape. It's about the importance of challenging our assumptions and confronting the biases we may not even be aware we hold. In a world where success is often determined by the circles you run in, the recognition you receive, and the networks you belong to, Olivia's experience shines a light on the inequalities that persist, even in spaces where you'd expect everyone to be on equal footing. The fact that a powerful, accomplished woman could be overlooked by someone whose job it is to recognize VIP speaks volumes about how far we still have to go in terms of inclusivity and recognition. But the story doesn't end there. What happens when the guard finally realizes who Olivia is? And what does that moment teach us about judgment, self-awareness, and redemption? As we delve deeper into the story, we'll explore the emotional and societal implications of such moments, examining the ripple effect they create and how they serve as a powerful reminder of the work that still needs to be done. We'll also reflect on the role of power dynamics, social status, and recognition in shaping our interactions, and how a single moment of misjudgment can hold lessons for us all. So, what happens when the security guard finally understands his mistake? Does he apologize? Does Olivia confront him? And more importantly, what does this reveal about how we navigate the complexities of identity, power, and societal expectations? Stay with us as we unfold the full story, and perhaps, just perhaps, you'll see a reflection of your own experiences in Olivia's journey. "Excuse me, ma'am, but I'm afraid you can't enter," he says with an air of authority. His voice is calm, but there's an edge to it, a subtle tone of doubt that doesn't sit well with you. You, who should be at the center of attention tonight, are now facing the irony of being judged at the very threshold of the event you are the star of. His eyes scan you up and down as if he's trying to figure out who you really are, but not in the way one might expect when assessing a VIP. Instead, it's a judgmental stare that feels more like a challenge. You can see it in his eyes. He's unsure. But surely this can't be happening. Surely he doesn't know who you are. After all, you are Olivia Carter, the keynote speaker, the reason many people are here tonight. But to the guard, you're just another face in the crowd. And as his clipboard shifts in his hand, you realize this isn't just a simple misunderstanding. This moment is a manifestation of something far deeper, a reflection of systemic biases that lurk in the shadows of every high-profile event, every corporate gathering, and every interaction where power dynamics play out. What's frustrating is not just the guard's mistake, but the deeper truth it exposes about how easily people can dismiss those who don't fit their preconceived notions. As you stand there, a chill runs down your spine, not just because of the absurdity of the situation, but because in this moment, the guard isn't the only one making assumptions. It's a moment many people, especially those who hold power, will be all too familiar with. But Olivia Carter doesn't back down. Not now, not ever. With poise, she calmly explains that she's the keynote speaker. But even as she states the truth, she knows the challenge ahead is far more complex than just getting past the guard. It's about breaking through a deeply rooted barrier of bias and prejudice, one that runs rampant in all corners of society, whether we see it or not. In this seemingly small moment, we're presented with a reflection of a much larger issue: the way individuals, especially women of color, are often overlooked, undermined, and excluded, even when they are the ones in power. This is a story not just about one woman's personal experience, but about the everyday struggles that many people face when they are judged by their appearance, by their race, or by outdated assumptions. The story of Olivia Carter and the security guard is, at its core, a story of mistaken identity. But it's also a story of how identity, who we are and how we're perceived, can have such a profound impact on the way we navigate the world. It speaks to the subtle but powerful ways that bias seeps into our interactions and decisions, and how that bias can be both unintentional and deeply ingrained. As the guard stands there, clipboard in hand, he begins to realize his mistake. But the real question is, does he learn from it? And what does this moment say about how society continues to perpetuate these biases, often without even realizing it? But let's back up for a moment. What if this scene were to unfold in a different setting? One where the roles were reversed, where Olivia was a man, or where she fit the typical image of a corporate elite? Would things have gone differently? Would the security guard have recognized her instantly? Would he have hesitated for even a second? These questions are important because they help us understand how biases influence not just individual actions, but the systems and structures that govern our lives. It's a reality that people of color, especially Black women, face regularly in various industries, from corporate boardrooms to the red carpet, and from government halls to private events. In Olivia's case, her dignity and sense of self-worth are tested in front of a crowd she should be leading. But her response, measured, calm, and assertive, shows us an alternative narrative, a path of resilience, self-assurance, and grace in the face of adversity. This story, in its essence, isn't just about one moment of humiliation, but about how moments like these highlight broader societal issues. Olivia's experience at the VIP event serves as a microcosm of what happens when people are placed into boxes based on race, gender, or appearance. And in this specific case, the box Olivia finds herself in is one of invisibility, despite her undeniable presence and power. As we continue, let's explore not just the events that unfold, but the larger implications of such a scenario. What happens when people who should be in positions of power and influence are not recognized, not because of their capabilities, but because of who they are assumed to be? What does this reveal about our society? And how can we learn from such instances to challenge the biases that shape our interactions every day? Let's dive deeper into this story, understanding the emotional toll, the social constructs at play, and how Olivia's experience can serve as a catalyst for change, not just for herself, but for others who face similar struggles or expectations. It's an unsettling reminder of how bias can cloud judgment, even in a world that prides itself on being progressive and inclusive. For Olivia, this moment isn't just about a security guard making an error in identifying her. It's about the larger, more ingrained prejudice that often follows people who don't conform to a certain image or standard of what belongs in elite spaces. She stands there, in her elegant dress, poised and confident, yet she's being treated as if she doesn't belong, simply because of how she looks. As the guard persists, his actions are not just an inconvenience, they are an insult. It's not just the fact that he's blocking her entry into the event. It's the fact that he doesn't see her as worthy of the same respect he would show anyone else who might look the part of a keynote speaker. His doubts seem to be rooted not in the content of her character or her accomplishments, but in her appearance. And that's a reality many people, particularly women of color, face every day. Imagine the frustration Olivia must have felt. She had no reason to believe she would be treated this way. After all, this was her event. The crowd was here to hear her speak, to listen to her insights, and yet, she was being judged not for her expertise or accomplishments, but for the color of her skin. For the way society often dismisses individuals who don't meet certain standards of beauty, class, or social expectation. But here's where the story gets interesting. What follows isn't just a moment of tension. It's a moment of redemption, a moment when the guard, oblivious to the gravity of his mistake, begins to realize something that will change the course of his night, and perhaps his understanding of who truly belongs in spaces of power. As Olivia stands there, gracefully handling the situation with a calm but resolute demeanor, she doesn't escalate the conflict. Instead, she offers a simple, steady response. "I'm the keynote speaker," she says with a quiet confidence. But the guard doesn't hear her, or perhaps doesn't believe her. At this point, a subtle shift begins. The realization starts to dawn on him, slowly. He looks at Olivia again, studying her with a slightly different gaze. But this time, there's something else. Recognition. He begins to piece together the pieces, mentally running through the guest list, perhaps thinking about the many influential people expected to attend this event. And then, a shift occurs in his expression. The doubt in his eyes gives way to a tinge of embarrassment as the truth hits him. This isn't just some random woman trying to sneak into an exclusive party. This is the woman who has been invited to be the center of attention tonight, the keynote speaker, the one everyone has been waiting to hear from, the one who has the power to shape conversations in ways the guard could never imagine. And just like that, the power dynamics flip. This is the moment when the guard understands the full weight of his error. The realization must have been a mix of shock and humiliation as he watches Olivia, unfazed, walk past him and into the event she was always meant to attend. She's not the outsider. He is. He's the one who made the mistake, and it's a mistake that will haunt him far longer than the brief discomfort of this encounter. The shift in his understanding is not just a personal moment for him. It's a reminder to all of us about the subtleties of bias that still persist, even in settings where you'd least expect them. It's easy to think that the business world, the corporate world, and the world of exclusive events are free from discrimination. But stories like this reveal that assumptions about who belongs in these spaces are still being made every day, sometimes consciously and sometimes not. So what happens next? Does the guard apologize? Does he confront his own biases? Or does this moment pass into the sea of countless other overlooked injustices? As we continue, we'll dive deeper into the layers of this story, examining not just the moment of the mistake, but the broader implications it has for how we view power, prestige, and belonging in society. Olivia's experience is a microcosm of a larger issue that affects so many people, particularly women of color. But it's also a lesson in grace, confidence, and the quiet power of standing firm in the face of judgment. How do you respond when you're underestimated? How do you reclaim the narrative when someone tries to diminish your value based on preconceived notions? Olivia's journey through this night holds answers to these questions, but it also asks us to reflect on our own actions and assumptions, because in the end, we all have a part to play in ensuring that spaces of power are truly open to everyone, not just those who fit the mold of what society expects. For Olivia, this moment of being blocked at the entrance isn't just a minor hiccup. It is a glaring reflection of a reality she's been grappling with for years. Her skin color, her gender, and the assumptions people make about both of these aspects of her identity have been constant hurdles throughout her career. This isn't a one-off incident. It's a pattern. The same biases she's fought to overcome in boardrooms, conferences, and throughout her rise to prominence in her industry are now resurfacing at the very door of an event that should celebrate her achievements. But what if the security guard had seen her for who she truly was? The keynote speaker, the woman whose ideas and contributions had shaped industries and changed lives. What if he had recognized that power isn't always worn on the surface, in the way someone dresses or the way they look? What if he understood that true influence doesn't come from meeting some external standard but from the substance of one's accomplishments? The awkwardness of the moment is compounded by the fact that the guard's actions aren't simply a mistake. They are a symptom of something much larger. In an age where we like to believe that we have moved beyond these biases, incidents like this remind us that prejudice often operates on an unconscious level, silently influencing decisions and interactions. It's not necessarily the overt, visible discrimination that we need to worry about. It's the subtle assumptions, the gut reactions, the snap judgments made without truly considering the person standing before you. And the unfortunate reality is, this is not an isolated incident. Many people of color, especially Black women, face this type of discrimination regularly, not only in everyday life, but in places where they should be celebrated and respected for their hard work and accomplishments. What makes this particular moment so striking is how easily it could have been avoided. Had the security guard simply taken a moment to assess the situation, to recognize Olivia as the powerful figure she is, or simply to trust his own judgment over his bias. As Olivia stands there, locked in this brief but intense moment of tension, It's not just a simple misunderstanding. It's a reminder that even in spaces where one should be respected, a momentary lapse of judgment based on unconscious bias can alter the entire course of someone's experience. For Olivia, this night, meant to be a triumph, becomes an uncomfortable reminder of how far we still have to go in confronting these hidden prejudices. As Olivia Carter stood at the threshold of the Hilton Sapphire Ballroom, feeling both the weight of the guard's scrutiny and the sting of his disbelief, a question lingered in the air. Why was she being treated this way? The event was hers to lead, and yet, she was being forced to justify her very existence in the space. This wasn't just about a security guard failing to recognize her face. It was about a system of biases and assumptions that persist at all levels of society. This moment, while extreme, is a reality faced by countless people, especially women of color, who often find themselves navigating spaces that weren't initially built with them in mind. What happens when the world refuses to acknowledge your place? What happens when your accomplishments are overshadowed by the assumptions others make based on your appearance? It's easy for people to assume that the fight for equality is something of the past. After all, we live in a time when we've made significant strides in civil rights, gender equality, and workplace diversity. But beneath the surface, there are still significant barriers that people, especially women of color, face in the workplace and in other areas of life. These barriers aren't always as overt as a blatant racist comment or sexist behavior. Sometimes they manifest in the subtler forms of bias, like the security guard who didn't recognize Olivia because he simply couldn't imagine that someone like her could hold the position she did. In workplaces around the world, women of color frequently encounter the challenge of being overlooked, underestimated, and often treated as out of place, even when they hold top positions or are the keynote speakers at major events. For example, studies have shown that women of color are often the last to be promoted and the first to be sidelined in meetings, even when their contributions are equal to or greater than those of their colleagues. It's not just about gender. It's about race, too. Black women, in particular, are frequently subjected to double jeopardy, the unique disadvantage of facing both racial and gender discrimination. Olivia's experience at the VIP event is not an isolated case. It is a microcosm of a much larger issue. There is a systemic lack of recognition and respect for people from marginalized groups, especially when they step into spaces that are traditionally dominated by white men. And, just like in Olivia's case, the person responsible for blocking her path to success was not a villain, but an individual who, too often, didn't even realize they were a part of a system that was built on exclusion. At the heart of this incident lies the power of assumptions, those invisible judgments we make based on stereotypes, often without realizing it. In the case of Olivia, the security guard assumed she wasn't important enough to be allowed into the event because she didn't fit his image of a keynote speaker. This assumption is not just about her race, but also about how society often decides who belongs in certain spaces. Think about how many times we, as a society, subconsciously associate power, leadership, and success with a specific image, typically a white male in a suit. When someone like Olivia, an accomplished, intelligent, and capable woman of color, steps into a space like the Hilton Sapphire Ballroom, the very act of her presence challenges those deeply embedded assumptions. And in many cases, those who encounter such a challenge are unprepared to respond to it. Instead of recognizing Olivia's worth, they fall back on their biases as the security guard did. This is the power of stereotypes. They shape the way we see others and often prevent us from seeing the full complexity of their identities. For example, studies have shown that even highly educated professionals like doctors and executives are not immune to implicit bias. They might unknowingly give less credit to a female colleague's ideas in a meeting, or assume that a person of color is less qualified for a job than a white colleague with the same qualifications. These subtle forms of discrimination aren't just frustrating. They are harmful. They limit opportunities and reinforce existing power structures that exclude people who don't fit the traditional mold. But what if, in that very moment at the door of the Hilton ballroom, the security guard had seen Olivia for who she truly was? What if he had recognized her as the keynote speaker, the person whose words were about to change the trajectory of the evening? What if he had stepped back, acknowledged her presence, and welcomed her into the event with respect? The reality is he didn't, but the idea of what if is powerful because it shows us how easily we can perpetuate stereotypes and biases simply by not taking the time to truly see someone. It's not just about identifying people for what they appear to be. It's about understanding the full context of their lives and accomplishments. For Olivia, the moment she was stopped at the door wasn't just an inconvenience. It was a reminder that, despite all the progress she had made in her career, there were still those who saw her as an outsider, as someone who didn't belong in spaces of power. And that's a reality that many women of color face daily. Despite their qualifications, their achievements, and their expertise, they are still seen as other. It's easy for people to assume that the fight for equality is something of the past. After all, laws have been passed, and movements have gained significant ground. But the reality is that prejudice, bias, and systemic inequalities still persist in many forms, often hidden beneath the surface. Olivia Carter's experience at the VIP event wasn't just a moment of individual prejudice. It was a snapshot of a much broader issue: the subtle but pervasive effects of racial and gender bias that people of color, especially women, face daily. These biases often operate in ways that are invisible to those who don't experience them. Consider the workplace, for example, where women of color routinely find themselves having to work harder to be acknowledged, taken seriously, or even respected. A 2019 report from McKinsey & Company found that women of color face a double burden, having to navigate both gender and racial discrimination. For Olivia, the assumption made by the security guard at the Hilton ballroom was a reflection of this broader societal issue. Despite being a prominent keynote speaker at a high-profile event, her identity as a black woman led to an immediate, automatic assumption that she didn't belong. It wasn't a question of her credentials or abilities. It was simply the way she looked. In elite corporate spaces, there is often an illusion of progress. These events, where the industry's most powerful figures gather, advertise diversity and inclusion, yet the actual dynamics at play are far more complex. Women and people of color are invited to these spaces, but how often are they truly valued for their contributions? How often are they seen as equals, rather than tokens or exceptions? Olivia's experience is a clear example of what many people face in these spaces. The structure of these elite environments has historically been built by and for a certain demographic, mostly white, mostly male. And while many institutions have worked to diversify their ranks, the underlying culture remains one of exclusion. Those who don't fit the mold, whether due to race, gender, or class, are often made to feel like outsiders, even if they have the qualifications, the expertise, and the experience to lead. For people like Olivia, the everyday fight for recognition often manifests through microaggressions, those small, seemingly insignificant actions or comments that reinforce stereotypes or diminish one's worth. Microaggressions might not always be intentional, but they send a powerful message. You are not truly seen for who you are. When the security guard at the Hilton ballroom blocked Olivia's entrance, he wasn't just questioning her place at the event. He was engaging in a microaggression that many people of color experience daily. The assumption that she didn't belong was based on the way she looked, not on any of the qualities or achievements that should have earned her a place in that room. The fact that it took him several moments to even process the possibility that she could be the keynote speaker highlights a larger issue: the way society often undervalues and underestimates people of color, especially women. This microaggression, although seemingly small in isolation, is part of a broader pattern of behavior that happens across industries, communities, and social settings. It's the look that people give when they assume a black woman in a business suit is just another attendee, rather than the expert she is. It's the comment about how well-spoken someone is, as if their ability to articulate themselves is an anomaly rather than a standard. And it's the countless times people are forced to prove their worth, despite having already achieved more than their peers. The emotional toll of these experiences is often underestimated. For Olivia, the security guard's hesitation might have been just one moment in her life, but for many, it is a reflection of years of microaggressions and bias that take an emotional and mental toll. Constantly being forced to prove one's worth can lead to feelings of frustration, exhaustion, and even self-doubt. This emotional labor is something many people of color, especially women, carry with them every day. In many ways, Olivia's experience serves as a reminder of the invisible work people of color must perform just to be seen, respected, and valued in spaces where they've earned the right to be. For women of color, the emotional toll can be even greater, as they face the compounded challenge of navigating both racial and gender biases. So, how can this narrative change? How can people begin to truly see one another, not based on assumptions or appearances, but based on merit, skill, and contribution? The answer lies in collective action, acknowledging the biases that exist, both personal and structural, and actively working to break them down. But it also requires individuals to confront their own biases and to recognize that the worth of a person is not tied to how they look or where they come from, but to what they bring to the table. This isn't just about changing how we view others. It's about changing how we view ourselves. People like Olivia Carter, who break barriers and challenge stereotypes, are showing the world that talent and leadership come in all forms, from all backgrounds, and from all walks of life. By recognizing and celebrating this diversity, we can begin to dismantle the structures that have long excluded those who don't fit the traditional mold. Moreover, organizations and event planners must ensure that diversity and inclusion are more than just buzzwords. They must actively create environments where everyone, regardless of background, feels truly welcome, valued, and seen. Diversity in leadership, in particular, plays a crucial role in reshaping corporate culture and challenging the biases that have held back so many talented individuals. While Olivia's experience is unique to her, the underlying message is universal. The biases and assumptions that often lead to situations like this don't just affect the individuals directly involved, they ripple out to affect entire communities, industries, and cultures. By breaking down these barriers, we create a more inclusive world where everyone has the opportunity to succeed, regardless of race, gender, or any other factor. As we reflect on Olivia's experience, it's important to recognize that this isn't just a personal struggle. It's a collective one. Every time someone is overlooked, dismissed, or undervalued because of their identity, it's a reminder that we still have much work to do. But it's also an opportunity for growth, a chance to challenge the status quo and create a future where all individuals are recognized for their contributions, not for how they look. The ripple effect of Olivia's story is one that can change not only the way we see others, but the way we see ourselves. It's a call to action, to question our assumptions, to confront our biases, and to build a world that is truly inclusive for everyone, regardless of their background. Because, as Olivia Carter's story shows us, it's not about who you are on the outside, it's about what you bring to the table. And that's what truly matters. In spaces that are supposed to symbolize progress, success, and innovation, like corporate events or VIP gatherings, there's an uncomfortable truth that we often avoid discussing. Structural inequality is deeply embedded in these environments. While industries tout diversity initiatives and corporate responsibility, the barriers to true inclusion remain. Events like the one Olivia Carter was attending are often framed as opportunities for networking and learning, but they can also serve as exclusive arenas where certain voices are consistently elevated while others are marginalized, whether intentionally or not. In high-profile business circles where power dynamics are ever present, the issue of who gets invited, who gets to speak, and who is given credibility can be influenced by implicit biases. These biases are often subtle but impactful, shaping the way people are perceived and the way they perceive themselves within these spaces. The assumption that Olivia didn't belong at the event, based solely on her appearance, highlights just how easily these biases can cloud judgment, even in a room full of well-intentioned, supposedly progressive individuals. To understand the gravity of what happened with Olivia, we need to dissect the layers of bias that inform the security guard's actions. There are three key forms of bias that come into play. Implicit bias. This is perhaps the most insidious type of bias, prejudices, and stereotypes we carry unconsciously. These biases are learned over time, often from societal messages, media portrayals, and cultural conditioning. Even well-meaning individuals can be unaware of how these biases influence their behavior. The security guard likely didn't consciously decide to discriminate against Olivia, but his immediate decision to question her credibility without even asking her name or confirming her invitation was rooted in this kind of unconscious bias. Confirmation bias. Once the security guard decided that Olivia didn't belong, he began to filter all the information through that lens. He became fixated on finding reasons that fit this assumption. Confirmation bias makes us cling to our initial judgments, even in the face of contradictory evidence. If he had recognized Olivia's face or heard her name, he may have altered his approach, but in the moment, he allowed his assumptions to dictate his actions. Stereotype threat. For people of color, the weight of being stereotyped is an ongoing reality. Studies have shown that when individuals are aware of stereotypes about their group, they can be subconsciously affected by them, often leading to anxiety or self-doubt. Olivia, in this case, wasn't just dealing with an isolated incident of misjudgment. She was dealing with a broader societal expectation, whether overt or covert, that Black women, particularly in corporate spaces, aren't as worthy of recognition or authority. This stereotype threat isn't something that Olivia could just brush off. It is a constant force that shapes how she navigates her professional world. While Olivia's story is compelling, it's important to recognize that this is not an isolated incident. Around the world, countless women of color in various fields, from academia to entertainment, face similar challenges. For example, Dr. Lisa Simmons, a prominent neuroscientist, recounts an experience in which she was repeatedly mistaken for a janitor at a prestigious research conference, despite having a PhD and esteemed reputation in her field and being invited to speak at the event. She was asked by attendees if she could direct them to the real scientists. Another striking example comes from the entertainment industry, where director Ava DuVernay, after gaining critical acclaim for her film Selma, was repeatedly dismissed by film executives and producers. Despite being an accomplished director and visionary, DuVernay faced subtle, yet powerful, forms of bias, as her capabilities were questioned in comparison to her white male counterparts. These stories aren't just anecdotes, they are evidence of a larger issue that perpetuates inequality even in fields that are supposedly open to merit and talent. So, what can we learn from these experiences? First, it's clear that while overt racism and sexism may not always be as visible as they once were, the structures that perpetuate inequality are still very much alive and well. For individuals like Olivia Carter, breaking through these barriers requires not only personal resilience but also societal change. It requires spaces where diversity is not just about the number of diverse individuals but about the inclusion of their voices in meaningful ways. To change this system, it is essential to recognize the unconscious biases we all carry and, actively work to dismantle them. This can be done through training, education, and, perhaps most importantly, through personal reflection. Organizations and individuals need to foster environments where people like Olivia Carter are given the space to thrive without being scrutinized for things that should never matter, like skin color or gender. It's about ensuring that when someone walks into a room, their identity isn't something that works against them. Moreover, the experience of being marginalized because of race or gender highlights the necessity for allyship. It's not enough for individuals to merely not engage in discriminatory behavior. They must also be active in challenging it when they witness it. When a person of privilege sees an act of bias or discrimination, their role is not to stay silent, but to stand up and help correct the injustice. True allyship is about speaking out when we see wrong and using our power to elevate voices that have been suppressed. Implicit bias. This is perhaps the most insidious type of bias because it operates on an unconscious level. Implicit bias refers to the attitudes or stereotypes that affect our understanding, actions, and decisions in an unconscious manner. Even the most well-intentioned individuals, like the security guard at the event, can harbor implicit biases that lead them to make assumptions about others based on their race, gender, or other characteristics. In Olivia's case, the security guard likely didn't consciously decide to block her from entering. He might have viewed her as just another person at the entrance, but her identity, her race and gender, led to an automatic assessment that did not align with the profile of those typically seen as VIPs in such settings. This bias doesn't necessarily stem from malicious intent. Rather, it arises from a history of cultural and societal patterns that teach people to associate certain characteristics, like being well-dressed, tall, or light-skinned, with status and authority. It's these underlying patterns that create the expectations that Olivia, as a Black woman, doesn't belong in spaces like the VIP event. Confirmation bias. The security guard's actions also suggest confirmation bias, which is the tendency to interpret new information in ways that confirm pre-existing beliefs or stereotypes. When the guard saw Olivia approaching, he may have subconsciously relied on societal stereotypes about who should or shouldn't belong in elite spaces. Perhaps he expected VIPs to look a certain way. Perhaps he was conditioned to think that only those who fit a narrow mold were worthy of attending such high-profile events. This bias led him to dismiss Olivia's presence at the entrance, despite the fact that she was, in fact, the keynote speaker. Systemic racism. Finally, the deeper, more pervasive form of bias at play is systemic racism, the structures and systems that perpetuate unequal treatment based on race. In many corporate and social settings, even those with the best intentions, there are often invisible barriers that prevent people of color, particularly Black women, from accessing the same opportunities and respect afforded to others. While Olivia was invited to the event as a keynote speaker, her appearance, and the assumptions made about it, revealed just how deeply ingrained these systemic issues are. The security guard's actions were a microcosm of a much larger societal problem, where people of color, particularly women, are often denied their rightful space in high-status environments due to racial biases, even when they've earned that space through their talents and hard work. For Olivia, this experience at the Hilton Ballroom wasn't just a temporary inconvenience. It likely had a lasting psychological impact. Time and time again, women of color have reported feeling the weight of constantly having to prove their worth and struggle against the biases that undermine their identity and accomplishments. For many, these experiences aren't rare. They are the norm. Psychologists call this experience racial battle fatigue, a condition that results from the constant stress of dealing with racism and discrimination. It's the emotional toll of being frequently subjected to microaggressions, being judged based on appearance, and facing the daily challenges of having to prove one's competence in a world that's skeptical of your capabilities because of your race or gender. Racial battle fatigue manifests in a variety of ways. from exhaustion and frustration to feelings of isolation and self-doubt. In Olivia's case, the security guard's actions likely contributed to that emotional toll. As a successful professional who had already achieved so much, being denied access simply because of her appearance would have triggered feelings of alienation and frustration. It's exhausting to constantly battle the assumptions of others, and even more so when these assumptions are embedded in systems that are meant to elevate, not exclude, individuals based on merit. This incident, while deeply personal for Olivia, is a reminder of the larger societal structures that continue to perpetuate inequality in corporate and elite spaces. High-profile events like the one Olivia attended often pride themselves on their exclusivity and influence, but this exclusivity can also serve to reinforce narrow definitions of success and power, definitions that are often rooted in race, class, and gender. In corporate circles, the idea of fitting in often comes with a set of unwritten rules: what people wear, how they speak, and even the way they look. These standards are typically shaped by a homogeneous group of elites who control these spaces, and anyone who doesn't fit into these rigid molds is often excluded or questioned, even if they're more than qualified to be there. Olivia's experience wasn't just a personal challenge. It was part of a larger pattern that keeps marginalized voices from being heard in spaces of influence. The security guard's mistake wasn't an isolated incident. It was an illustration of how these biases infiltrate even the most prestigious events. The discomfort of feeling like an outsider, even when you've been invited to lead and contribute, is a challenge that countless professionals of color face, often without recognition or support. As Olivia finally made her way into the event, the security guard likely began to realize the gravity of his mistake. The moment of realization, though brief, carries with it an important lesson. The damage caused by bias is not just about the immediate mistake, but also the long-term impact on the person affected. For Olivia, this was more than just an incident at the door. It was a vivid reminder of the constant need to prove herself, to be seen for who she truly is, rather than being judged by superficial appearances. And while she may have brushed off the moment with grace, the emotional toll was real. The damage done to her sense of belonging, to her sense of worth in a space she should have been able to enter with ease, is not something easily undone. But this experience also offers a larger opportunity for growth and reflection, for Olivia, for the security guard, and for all of us. It serves as a stark reminder that we must remain vigilant in confronting biases, especially in spaces that are meant to promote success, equality, and empowerment. True inclusivity means recognizing and dismantling these subtle forms of discrimination, ensuring that everyone, regardless of race, gender, or background, can step into these spaces without fear of judgment or exclusion. The story of Olivia Carter's encounter at the Hilton Ballroom is one that resonates with anyone who has ever been made to feel like an outsider. It's a call to action for all of us to reflect on how biases shape the way we interact with others, whether in corporate settings, social gatherings, or everyday life. In the next section, we will explore how Olivia's story connects with broader issues of inclusion, equality, and systemic change. We'll look at real-world examples where bias has either been challenged or perpetuated in similar elite settings, and discuss practical steps that can be taken to create spaces that are truly inclusive. Confirmation bias. The security guard's actions also suggest confirmation bias, which is the tendency to interpret new information in ways that confirm pre-existing beliefs or stereotypes. When the guard saw Olivia approaching, he likely made a snap judgment based on the way she appeared, reinforcing any unconscious biases he might have had about who belongs in the VIP section of such an exclusive event. Rather than questioning his assumptions, he allowed them to guide his actions. For example, the guard may have assumed that someone dressed in a way that didn't conform to the typical attire of a corporate VIP, perhaps a bit more casual or unconventional, was more likely to be a staff member, a guest from outside the industry, or someone simply in the wrong place. This instinctive, automatic bias toward confirmation of his stereotype led him to block Olivia from entry, without considering the possibility that she was the keynote speaker, the very person everyone was gathered to hear. This scenario illustrates how deeply ingrained stereotypes can shape our perceptions and decisions, even when we consciously try to reject them. People often look for evidence to confirm their beliefs, even if it means ignoring facts that contradict their assumptions. The result is a feedback loop where biases remain unchecked, perpetuating inequality and limiting opportunities for those who don't meet conventional expectations. Status quo bias. The third form of bias at play is status quo bias, the tendency to prefer things to stay the way they are and resist change. In environments where elite circles are concerned, the status quo often includes certain unspoken rules about who is allowed to rise to the top and who gets to be seen as worthy of high status. The status quo often hinges on a very narrow definition of what success looks like, usually defined by race, gender, and class. Olivia's appearance at the VIP event, as a black woman dressed confidently in an emerald green gown, challenged the status quo. To the security guard, and perhaps others in the room, her presence may have seemed out of place, an anomaly that didn't fit the preconceived notion of what a keynote speaker should look like. This resistance to deviation from the norm is not uncommon, especially in spaces where power dynamics are entrenched and exclusive. While these biases may seem abstract or theoretical, they have real, tangible effects on the people who experience them. Olivia's experience with the security guard wasn't just an isolated incident. It was part of a broader emotional toll that people of color, especially women, endure daily as they navigate spaces where they are not always welcomed with open arms. The psychological burden of constantly having to prove oneself, to justify one's worth, is draining. In Olivia's case, she was forced to confront this on the very night that was supposed to be her celebration. Instead of focusing on delivering her speech and engaging with the crowd, she had to deal with the emotional weight of being doubted, of being seen as less deserving simply because of her race and gender. Studies have shown that the emotional toll of such bias can lead to feelings of alienation, imposter syndrome, and burnout. For many Black women in the workplace, these experiences are not rare. They are a consistent, everyday struggle. And even when the bias is subtle or unintentional, its effects can be just as harmful. Olivia's incident also brings to light the gap between how far society claims to have come and the reality on the ground. Many companies, institutions, and organizations claim to prioritize diversity and inclusion, yet time and time again, situations like Olivia's occur, ones that reveal the underlying disconnect between public messaging and the lived reality of people of color. While there may be more initiatives in place today to promote diversity in the corporate world, the fact remains that many of these efforts are not enough to dismantle the deeply ingrained biases that govern our daily interactions. It's not enough to have diversity training or surface-level representation at the top. True inclusion requires a cultural shift, one that actively challenges the biases embedded in every aspect of society. When people like Olivia Carter are continually overlooked or mistaken for being less deserving based solely on their appearance, it undermines any progress that has been made toward equality. Her experience is a stark reminder that achieving visible diversity is not the same as achieving true inclusion. Diversity without inclusion is just a cosmetic change, a shift in numbers, not in attitudes or access. Olivia's experience also brings attention to the concept of intersectionality, a term coined by legal scholar Kimberly Crenshaw. Intersectionality recognizes that individuals experience multiple forms of discrimination simultaneously, and that these forms of oppression intersect to create unique and compounded challenges. For Olivia, the intersection of being a Black woman in a predominantly white, male-dominated space creates a double burden. She faces both racial discrimination and gender-based discrimination, which together make it even harder for her to navigate elite environments. This concept of intersectionality is crucial in understanding why Olivia's experience at the event was so significant. Her identity as a Black woman meant she had to work harder to be recognized as the keynote speaker, despite the fact that she was the very reason people were attending. Intersectionality explains why certain individuals, especially women of color, are often held to higher standards, have their achievements overlooked, and are more likely to be questioned or doubted. The unique challenges that arise from intersectionality also shed light on why bias affects marginalized groups in different and more complicated ways. Olivia wasn't just fighting against racial prejudice. She was also confronting the gendered assumptions that women, especially women of color, are not the ones in charge, not the ones who should hold positions of power or influence. Status quo bias. Another crucial element at play is status quo bias, which is the preference for things to remain the same rather than risk disruption. In the context of the corporate world and high-profile events, status quo bias can manifest in the unspoken rules of who gets to participate and who doesn't. It's the idea that certain people, often those with established power, wealth, or societal visibility, are expected to occupy certain spaces, while others who don't fit into these familiar molds are overlooked or excluded. In Olivia's case, the guard's assumption that she didn't belong could be seen as a reflection of a larger systemic issue in elite spaces. Those who fit the dominant profile of what a leader or speaker should look like are often given the benefit of the doubt, while others who don't fit that profile are scrutinized or dismissed. This bias towards maintaining the familiar order perpetuates inequalities by making it harder for those outside the conventional norms, whether due to race, gender, or other factors, to be fully accepted and recognized for their contributions. In this case, Olivia wasn't just being blocked physically from entering a room. She was being subtly told that her presence disrupted the unspoken norms of the event. While the situation at the Hilton Sapphire Ballroom was specific to Olivia, it echoes broader challenges faced by women and people of color in professional settings. The personal toll of constantly having to prove your worth, of being judged by factors outside of your control, can be emotionally exhausting. It's not just about one instance of discrimination. It's about the constant microaggressions, the subtle dismissals, and the ever-present feeling of needing to overperform just to be seen as equal. Research into microaggressions, the everyday slights, insults, and dismissals faced by marginalized groups, shows that these seemingly small moments can accumulate over time, leading to significant emotional and psychological tolls. For professionals like Olivia, the constant need to assert their legitimacy in spaces that were not originally designed for them can lead to feelings of isolation, frustration, and even burnout. And it's not just about personal discomfort. It can affect their career trajectory. Being continuously questioned or disregarded can hold people back from achieving the full potential they deserve. When we examine spaces like corporate boardrooms, industry conferences, and high-profile events, it becomes clear that they were often designed by and for people who fit a particular mold, typically white, male, and wealthy. These spaces were not made with the intention of welcoming diverse voices or fostering inclusive leadership. As a result, those who don't fit the mold, like Olivia, often face an uphill battle just to be seen as equals. Corporate diversity initiatives, though well-intentioned, have had mixed results in addressing these deep-rooted issues. While companies may invest in diversity programs or leadership training, these efforts often fall short if they don't address the fundamental biases embedded in organizational culture. Simply inviting women and people of color into the room isn't enough if they still have to fight for their place at the table or are routinely underestimated. The fact that Olivia was blocked at the entrance, despite being the keynote speaker, illustrates the invisible barriers that still exist. This wasn't just a minor mistake. It was a reflection of how spaces, even in 2025, are still shaped by exclusionary practices. It's a reminder that we can't talk about diversity without also talking about equity, the need to not only include marginalized groups, but to actively ensure that they have equal opportunities to lead, succeed, and be recognized for their contributions. As Olivia stood at the entrance, the tension between her identity and the assumptions of those around her built to a critical point. The security guard, now realizing his mistake, must have felt a mixture of embarrassment, guilt, and perhaps even disbelief. How could he have missed it? How could he have failed to recognize the woman who was, in fact, the reason the event was taking place? But this moment of realization for the guard is more than just a personal misstep. It's a broader commentary on how easy it is for individuals to miss the full depth of someone's identity. We live in a world where judgment is often passed based on surface-level attributes, leading to moments like these, where people are denied the respect they deserve simply because they don't fit the expected mold. The security guard's eventual recognition of Olivia as the keynote speaker is a moment of awakening not just for him but for all of us. It's a moment that challenges us to rethink how we view others and how we create spaces that allow everyone to truly belong. This is just a part of the deeper examination into how bias works in real-world settings. The story of Olivia Carter serves as a powerful reminder of how crucial it is to look beyond first impressions and surface-level judgments. It is not enough to simply acknowledge diversity. We must actively confront the biases that prevent us from fully embracing it. The road ahead involves reshaping not just who gets into the room, but how the room itself is built to accommodate and elevate all voices, regardless of their appearance or background. As we reach the conclusion of Olivia Carter's story, we find ourselves at a pivotal moment, a moment that not only sheds light on the biases that persist in our society but also calls for introspection and action. The security guard's mistake was not an isolated incident. It was part of a larger, complex system that continues to shape the way we interact, perceive, and value one another in both personal and professional spaces. But what lessons can we take from this experience? And how can we begin to change the narrative? The power of representation. The most immediate lesson is the importance of representation. When people like Olivia Carter, women of color, and individuals from underrepresented groups are excluded or dismissed because of biases, it sends a damaging message that their contributions, achievements, and voices are not valued as much as those of others. On the flip side, when these individuals are given the platform and recognition they deserve, it fosters an environment of inclusivity, respect, and equality. Olivia's story is a stark reminder that representation isn't just about having diverse faces in a room. It's about actively acknowledging and uplifting those who bring unique perspectives and invaluable expertise to the table. It's crucial for industries, organizations, and communities to not only recognize this but to act on it. Representation matters not just for the people who are directly affected, but for society as a whole. Diverse perspectives lead to better decision-making, more innovative solutions, and a more harmonious future. Olivia's role as the keynote speaker wasn't just symbolic. Her ideas and leadership were what brought people to the event in the first place. That is the power of representation. Challenging implicit bias, we must confront the reality of implicit bias in all of its forms. The security guard's assumption was not malicious, but it was rooted in deeply ingrained cultural and societal patterns that associate certain traits with power, respect, and authority. Recognizing our biases is the first step in overcoming them. But recognition alone is not enough. We need to create environments where these biases are actively addressed, not just acknowledged. Training programs that help individuals recognize and mitigate implicit biases can go a long way in reducing these everyday microaggressions and barriers to inclusion. But it's not just about awareness. It's about action. Organizations must foster a culture where questioning these biases is encouraged, where conversations around race, gender, and privilege are normalized, and where systemic inequalities are actively dismantled. Empowering individuals to speak up. Another key lesson here is the importance of speaking up when we see injustice, big or small. Olivia didn't let the security guard's assumption go unchallenged, and though her initial frustration might have been a natural response, her quiet confidence and clarity eventually led to a resolution. In professional settings, it's often easy to stay silent, especially when you feel like you're in a position where challenging authority might jeopardize your standing. But, as Olivia demonstrated, speaking up, assertively and calmly, can be a powerful tool for disrupting harmful behaviors. Whether it's in the workplace, at an event, or in day-to-day interactions, voicing our concerns and standing up for ourselves and others creates an environment where accountability is expected, creating more inclusive spaces. Finally, the incident highlights the need for more inclusive spaces, spaces where people feel comfortable and valued, regardless of their race, gender, or background. This goes beyond the diversity quotas or the tokenism that can sometimes pervade corporate culture. True inclusivity is about recognizing that everyone, regardless of their appearance or background, has something valuable to contribute. It's about building environments where diversity is not just tolerated, but celebrated. It's important for event organizers, company leaders, and individuals to take an active role in creating these spaces. Whether it's by rethinking the security protocols at events or by revisiting the criteria used to select speakers, leaders must work to ensure that people like Olivia are never made to feel out of place in spaces where they truly belong. Inclusion is not a luxury, it's a necessity for a society that values justice, equity, and respect. Final thoughts: the story of Olivia Carter is not just a tale of a single mistake made by a security guard. It's a reflection of broader societal challenges that need to be addressed. Her experience serves as a wake-up call for all of us to examine the biases we hold, the systems we contribute to, and the actions we can take to create a more equitable world. Through representation, challenging implicit bias, empowering individuals to speak up, and fostering inclusivity, we can begin to break down the barriers that prevent so many from realizing their full potential. Olivia's story is not an isolated one, but if we all commit to learning from it and to acting in ways that challenge the status quo, we can turn these stories into examples of how much we've grown and evolved as a society. The question is, will we rise to the occasion? A call for change in the end. Olivia's story challenges us to look beyond the surface and question the systems we operate in. She is a reminder that no matter how high one climbs in their career, no matter how hard they work or how much they achieve, the fight for equity and respect is ongoing. This story isn't just about one woman's experience. It's a reflection of the larger cultural shifts we need to make in order to create a world where everyone, regardless of their background, can walk into a room and feel like they truly belong. As we move forward, let us take these lessons to heart. Let's build spaces where every individual's contribution is valued, where biases are acknowledged and dismantled, and where we all have a part to play in creating a more just and inclusive world. As we reflect on Olivia Carter's experience, it's crucial to remember that the fight for inclusion and equality doesn't end with a single event or a single action. Each of us has the power to challenge the biases that exist within ourselves and in the spaces we occupy. It's not enough to recognize injustice when it happens. We must also actively work to prevent it from happening in the first place. So, what can you do? Examine your own biases. We all carry biases, whether we are aware of them or not. Start by being honest with yourself about your assumptions and stereotypes. Educate yourself, engage in conversations, and be open to change. Speak up. Don't stay silent when you witness exclusion, discrimination, or bias. Your voice can be a powerful tool in creating change, whether it's in the workplace, at events, or in your everyday life. Support inclusive environments. Advocate for spaces that prioritize diversity, equality, and respect. Whether it's through supporting businesses, events, or initiatives that uplift marginalized voices, your actions can help reshape the culture around you. Let's make sure that the next time someone like Olivia Carter steps into a room, they are met with the respect, recognition, and opportunity they deserve. It's time to open the door to a future where everyone truly belongs. If you're ready to be part of this change, hit the like button, share this video, and let's start the conversation. Together, we can build a world that values everyone, regardless of their background or appearance.